Sometimes the darkest hour brings the greatest light. When a man believes he has lost everything, Providence may place before him the very purpose he was born to fulfill. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on Joshua Blake as he carved the final letters into the weathered piece of oak. His calloused hands, once steady enough to draw a gun faster than any man in 3 counties, now trembled slightly as he worked. The wooden marker would serve as his headstone, bearing the simple inscription, "Here lies a man who lost everything." 45 years old and looking 20 years older, Joshua had spent the last 5 years as a ghost among the living. The typhus had taken them both within a week of each other. First little Samuel, barely 8 years old, then Martha, his beloved wife of 12 years. The fever had consumed them while he sat helpless, watching death steal away everything that gave his life meaning. The abandoned homestead around him reflected his inner desolation. The fence posts leaned at crooked angles, the barn roof sagged under years of neglect, and tumbleweeds had claimed the vegetable garden Martha once tended with such care. The star-shaped badge that once gleamed on his vest now lay buried beneath the floorboards with his service revolver and what remained of his shattered pride. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Joshua set down his carving knife and examined his handiwork. The marker would do. By nightfall, when the desert cold crept in to replace the scorching heat, Joshua Blake would join his family in whatever realm awaited beyond this vale of tears. He had planned every detail with the methodical precision that once made him a formidable lawman. The distant shimmer of heat waves caught his attention, and Joshua squinted across the barren landscape. 4 small figures moved through the wavering air like mirages, growing larger as they approached his property. Children, he realized with growing confusion. 4 little girls in tattered dresses, the oldest appearing no more than 13 years of age. Their unexpected appearance disrupted his carefully laid plans, stirring emotions he had believed were buried as deep as his family. As they drew closer, Joshua could see the fear etched into their young faces, the way they clung to each other for comfort and protection. Something was terribly wrong. These were not lost children wandering the desert by accident. They were running from something, or someone. And whatever had driven 4 young girls to brave the harsh Arizona wilderness alone must be far worse than the dangers that surrounded them now. Joshua Blake set aside his wooden marker and waited. The 4 girls stumbled into the shade of Joshua's broken-down porch, their faces streaked with dust and exhaustion. The oldest, a determined-looking girl with tangled brown hair, stepped forward while the others huddled behind her like frightened quail. "Mr. Blake?" she asked, her voice hoarse from the desert heat. "We walked 3 days to find you. My name is Sophie, and these are Hannah, Rosa, and Grace." She gestured to each girl in turn. Hannah appeared about 11 with bright red hair, Rosa maybe 9 with dark braids, and little Grace could not have been more than 7 years old. Joshua studied their faces, noting the hollow cheeks and the way their clothes hung loose on their small frames. But it was the marks he saw that made his blood run cold. Bruises on their arms, a cut on Hannah's lip that was still healing, and the haunted look in their eyes that spoke of horrors no child should witness. "How do you know my name, child?" Joshua asked, his voice gentler than it had been in years. "The lady told us," Sophie replied, glancing nervously over her shoulder at the empty desert. "Before they killed her, she said you were a good man who would help children in trouble. She said you lived out here alone and that you would understand about losing people you love." Grace, the smallest, tugged at Sophie's torn sleeve. "Tell him about the bad man, Sophie. Tell him what Mr. Clarkson did to the crying lady." Sophie's face went pale. "We saw something terrible at the Clarkson House of Mercy. That is where we lived, where they said they took care of orphans. But Mr. Clarkson, he was not merciful at all. There was a lady who came asking questions about missing children. She had papers in a leather bag. The girl's voice dropped to a whisper. We were hiding in the cellar when we heard her screaming. When we looked through the crack in the door, we saw Mr. Clarkson hurting her bad. She stopped crying after a while, and then she stopped moving too." Hannah picked up the story, her small hands clenched into fists. "He saw us watching. We ran as fast as we could, but we heard him telling his men to find us and make sure we never told anyone what we saw. The lady had given Sophie her bag before it happened." Joshua felt something stir inside him that he had not experienced since Martha and Samuel died, a burning rage at the sight of innocent suffering. These children were not merely lost. They were witnesses to murder, running for their lives across the unforgiving desert. A distant cloud of dust appeared on the horizon, and all four girls pressed closer together, their eyes wide with terror. "They found us," Grace whispered, her small voice breaking with fear. The dust cloud resolved into 5 riders. Joshua recognized Deputy Sheriff Reynolds immediately, a man he had never trusted. Reynolds rode with arrogance, flanked by 4 rough men who looked more like hired guns than lawmen. "Quick," Joshua whispered to the girls. "Hide in the root cellar beneath the barn, behind the grain sacks. Stay quiet." Sophie led the others to safety as Joshua resumed carving his wooden marker, appearing calm. Reynolds stopped 20 feet away. "Joshua Blake, been a long time. What brings you to my land?" "Reynolds." Joshua did not look up, though every muscle was tense. "Looking for dangerous criminals? 4 of them." Reynolds held up a folded paper. "Official warrant. You seen any strangers?" Joshua met his gaze. 4 dangerous criminals? What did they do? "Theft. Stole valuable items from a respected businessman. Could be armed." Reynolds dismounted, gesturing to his men who began searching. "Mind if we look around?" "Depends on what 4 people could carry on foot in this heat," Joshua replied. "Must be something small and precious to send 5 armed men into the desert." Reynolds' jaw tightened. "Just cooperation, Blake, same as any citizen would show the law." The men searched the barn and house, finding nothing. Joshua continued carving, listening to every sound. "Funny thing," Reynolds said, his voice threatening. "Description says they are real small. Might look like children to someone who did not know better. A man who helped fugitives could find serious trouble." "The kind that requires a man to disappear permanently?" Joshua asked. Reynolds smiled coldly. "Accidents happen in the desert. Wild country. Man could get lost, never seen again, especially one acting strange, talking about ending his troubles." The men regrouped, reporting no success. Reynolds mounted but lingered. "We will be back, Blake. Next time we might search more thoroughly. Dig deeper, if you understand." As the riders departed, Joshua knew he had made powerful enemies. The corrupt system protecting Clarkson stretched further than he had imagined. When they returned, and they would return, it would be with more men and fewer pretenses about following the law. The girls emerged from hiding as the dust settled. Their frightened faces told Joshua everything he needed to know about the evil they had witnessed and the desperate flight that brought them to his doorstep. Once the dust from Reynolds' departure had settled, Joshua helped the girls emerge from their hiding place in the root cellar. Sophie clutched a worn leather satchel against her chest, her knuckles white with tension. "The lady gave this to me before Mr. Clarkson found us," Sophie whispered, her voice barely audible. "She said if anything happened to her, we should find someone who would make sure the truth came out." Joshua accepted the heavy bag with careful hands. Inside, he found dozens of official documents, photographs, and handwritten notes that made his blood run cold. The papers detailed a massive network of child trafficking that stretched across 2 states, with the Clarkson House of Mercy serving as its central hub. The investigator had been thorough in documenting her findings. Children were categorized like livestock. The strongest boys sold to mining companies for dangerous work underground. Older girls sent to brothels in distant cities. And the youngest disappeared into private sales for what the notes euphemistically called special arrangements. "Dear God," Joshua muttered, reading page after page of evidence. Names, dates, amounts of money, shipping routes. It was all there in meticulous detail. The woman had uncovered enough evidence to destroy Clarkson, his entire operation, and send dozens of conspirators to prison. "She told us there were children missing from orphanages in 3 different towns," Hannah said quietly. "Some were sold like horses at auction. Others just vanished in the night." Rosa pointed to a photograph showing a group of children standing beside a freight wagon. "That is little Tommy from our orphanage. Mr. Clarkson said he went to live with a nice family, but the lady found out he was sent to work in the copper mines near Tucson." The documents revealed corruption reaching into the highest levels of local government. Sheriff, deputies, judges, even the territorial governor's office, all bought and paid for by Clarkson's blood money. The investigation had been conducted in secret because the woman knew she could trust no one in official positions. Grace tugged at Joshua's sleeve. "The crying lady said Mr. Clarkson sold babies to rich people who could not have their own. She said some people paid thousands of dollars for the littlest ones." Joshua felt his hands shaking as he read the final pages of the investigation. The woman had discovered that Clarkson was planning to expand his operation, opening new orphanages in Colorado and New Mexico territories. The scale of the horror was beyond anything he had imagined. "This evidence could destroy him," Joshua said, looking at the four frightened faces before him. But it also makes you the most dangerous witnesses alive. Clarkson cannot afford to let you live. Thunder rumbled in the distance, but Joshua realized it was not a storm approaching. The sound of many horses echoed across the desert, growing louder with each passing moment. As darkness fell across the Arizona desert, Reynolds returned with 15 armed men. They surrounded the homestead like wolves circling wounded prey, their torches casting dancing shadows across the barren landscape. Joshua quickly led the girls back to the root cellar, pressing the investigator's documents into Sophie's hands. "Whatever happens, keep those papers safe," he whispered urgently. "They are the only proof that can stop Clarkson." From his position in the house, Joshua watched the men take strategic positions around his property. These were not lawmen conducting a search. They were hired killers preparing for a massacre. Reynolds called out from behind the cover of the old water trough. "Blake, send out the children and nobody gets hurt." "We know they are in there." Joshua checked his rifle and the few rounds of ammunition he had left. 5 years of self-imposed exile had left him poorly prepared for a siege, but his military training from the war came flooding back. He would make every shot count. "What children?" Joshua shouted back. "You searched this place already. Do not play games with us." Reynolds' voice carried a note of desperation. "Mr. Clarkson wants his property returned. Those brats stole something valuable, and he wants it back." 2 men crept toward the house from the east while another pair approached from the west. Joshua fired once, dropping the lead man instantly. The others scattered for cover as muzzle flashes erupted from multiple positions around the homestead. Within minutes, the roof caught fire from a thrown torch. Smoke began filtering down through the ceiling as Joshua moved from window to window, trying to keep the attackers at bay. The girls would suffocate in the cellar if the fire spread much further. "Last chance, Blake," Reynolds called out. "Send them out or we burn the whole place down with everyone inside. We will tell folks you went crazy and killed those poor children before taking your own life." Joshua made his choice. He burst through the front door, drawing all their fire while the girls escaped through the rear of the house toward the desert. Bullets splintered the wooden porch around him as he dove for cover behind an overturned wagon. The night erupted into chaos as 15 guns opened fire on his position. Joshua returned fire methodically, using every trick he had learned during his years as both soldier and lawman. But he was hopelessly outnumbered, and his ammunition would not last much longer. Through the smoke and gunfire, he heard Reynolds shouting new orders to his men. Joshua's sacrifice had been in vain. Through the smoke and flames, he heard the terrified screams of the girls as Reynolds' men dragged them back from the desert. His heart sank as he realized his desperate gambit had failed. "Got them, boss," one of the gunmen called out. "All 4, just like you wanted." Reynolds emerged from cover, his face twisted with savage satisfaction. "Well now, Blake, seems your heroics did not amount to much. These little witnesses are coming with us, and there is nothing you can do to stop it." From his position behind the burning wagon, Joshua could see the girls being forced into a supply wagon at gunpoint. Little Grace was crying, while Sophie tried to comfort the younger ones despite her own terror. The leather satchel containing the evidence was nowhere to be seen. "You got what you came for," Joshua shouted. "Let them go and take me instead." Reynolds laughed harshly, afraid it does not work that way. "See, dead men tell no tales, but scared little girls might talk someday. Mr. Clarkson cannot afford that kind of risk." Joshua made his decision. Instead of surrendering, he crawled back toward his burning house, bullets whining overhead. Inside, hidden beneath loose floorboards, lay his emergency supplies from his days as sheriff, including 2 pounds of black powder he had saved for blasting stumps. The heat was nearly unbearable as he retrieved the powder kegs. Working frantically, he scattered the explosive throughout the remaining structure, creating a makeshift bomb that would level half the building. If he was going to die tonight, he would take as many of these killers with him as possible. Joshua lit the fuse and sprinted toward the wagon where the girls were being held. The explosion erupted behind him like thunder, sending debris flying in every direction. 5 men caught in the blast were killed instantly, while others dove for cover in panic and confusion. In the chaos that followed, Joshua fought with the desperate fury of a man who had found something worth dying for. He tackled the guard nearest the wagon, wrestling the man, his pistol away and putting a bullet through Reynolds' shoulder. The tide of battle shifted as the surviving gunmen regrouped. But on the horizon, a new dust cloud appeared, more riders approaching fast. Joshua's heart sank as he realized Clarkson himself was arriving with reinforcements. 25 fresh killers rode hard toward the burning homestead, their weapons glinting in the firelight. Clarkson rode at the head of his small army, a well-dressed man whose expensive suit could not disguise the evil that radiated from him like heat from a forge. His cold eyes surveyed the burning wreckage of the homestead with calculating precision. "Mr. Blake," Clarkson called out, his voice carrying the cultured tones of education and wealth. "You have caused me considerable inconvenience tonight. Those children belong to me, and I intend to collect what is mine." Joshua crouched behind the overturned wagon, checking his stolen pistol. 6 shots remained, and he was surrounded by 25 professional killers. The odds were impossible, but he had already accepted his fate. All that mattered now was buying the girls enough time to escape again. $15,000 to the man who brings me Blake, his head, Clarkson announced to his men. "But I want those children alive and unharmed. They have information I need before they die." The promise of reward sent ripples of greed through the assembled gunmen. Joshua watched as they spread out, their discipline wavering as individual ambition overcame tactical sense. Clarkson had made a crucial mistake, turning his own men against each other with the promise of wealth. Joshua used their greed against them, firing carefully placed shots that sent men diving for the same cover, creating confusion and mistrust in their ranks. When 2 gunmen simultaneously claimed the same protected position behind a water barrel, they turned their weapons on each other instead of him. A bullet creased Joshua, his shoulder, spinning him around. Another grazed his thigh, but he kept moving, using his intimate knowledge of the property to stay ahead of their coordinated assault. Blood loss was making him dizzy, but fury kept him fighting. From somewhere in the darkness beyond the firelight, he heard the crack of rifle fire that was not directed at him. The girls had found weapons and were fighting back from their own positions. "Sophie," his voice carried across the night, coordinating their defense with remarkable courage. But their ammunition would not last forever, and Clarkson, his men were closing in from all sides. Joshua realized he had to make a final desperate move or watch the children die before his eyes. He broke from cover and sprinted toward the rocky outcropping where the girls had taken refuge. Bullets kicked up dust around his feet as he ran through the crossfire, driven by a paternal instinct he thought had died with his son. 20 yards, 15, 10. A rifle bullet slammed into his back, sending him tumbling into the rocks where 4 frightened children waited for salvation that might never come. Joshua tumbled into a narrow canyon where the girls had taken shelter, blood seeping through his shirt from the bullet wound in his back. What he found there made his heart sink. 8 professional gunmen had positioned themselves on the canyon walls above, turning their refuge into a deadly trap. "Welcome to our little reception, Blake," called out one of the shooters from his elevated position. "Mr. Clarkson figured you might try something heroic, so we prepared accordingly." The entire escape had been anticipated and planned. Clarkson's organization was far more sophisticated than Joshua had realized, with contingencies for every possible outcome. The girls huddled behind a cluster of boulders, their stolen rifles nearly empty of ammunition. Crossfire erupted from multiple directions as the gunmen above coordinated their assault. Joshua rolled behind cover just as bullets sparked off the rocks where his head had been. The canyon walls created a natural killing ground with no way out except through the shooters. "Uncle Josh," little Grace cried out, using the name she had given him during their brief time together. She broke from cover and ran toward him, her small legs carrying her across the open ground. Joshua saw the rifle barrels swinging toward the child and threw himself forward, catching Grace in his arms just as multiple shots rang out. The impact of the bullets meant for her sent him sprawling, fresh blood spreading across his chest. Despite his wounds, Joshua dragged himself to the boulder where the girls waited. Sophie pressed a torn piece of her dress against his bleeding chest while Hannah and Rosa kept watch with their nearly empty weapons. "The papers," Joshua gasped, struggling to stay conscious. "Did you hide them?" Sophie nodded toward a crack in the canyon wall. "Safe where they will never find them. The truth will come out even if we do not survive this." More gunfire echoed from the canyon mouth as additional reinforcements poured in like a river of death. Clarkson's voice boomed down from above, magnified by the stone walls surrounding them. "You have fought bravely, Mr. Blake, but this ends now. Surrender the children and I might allow you to die quickly." Joshua checked his pistol, 2 bullets remaining. Around him, 4 brave children prepared to make their final stand against overwhelming odds. The sound of approaching hoofbeats suggested even more enemies were arriving. Then, cutting through the desert air like a blade of hope, came the clear notes of cavalry bugles sounding the charge from the eastern ridge. Major William Turner led 24 United States Army cavalrymen down into the canyon just as Clarkson made his final desperate move. The sound of the massive gunfight had carried for miles across the desert, drawing the attention of a patrol returning from the Mexican border. Clarkson appeared at the canyon rim, his expensive suit torn and dirty, a pistol in his trembling hand. "This is a private matter, Major. These are fugitive children who murdered one of my employees." Turner surveyed the scene below, a wounded man protecting 4 terrified girls against overwhelming odds, bodies scattered across the canyon floor, and the unmistakable signs of a massacre in progress. "Stand down, all of you," Turner commanded, his voice carrying the authority of federal law. "Drop your weapons immediately." Most of Clarkson's hired guns began lowering their rifles, but their employer was beyond reason. Years of operating above the law had convinced him that money and influence could solve any problem, even this one. "I will pay you $50,000 to turn around and ride away," Clarkson called down to Turner. "These children are dangerous criminals, and this man is helping them escape justice." In response to the bribe attempt, Turner drew his service revolver. "Mister, you just made the biggest mistake of your life." Clarkson panicked and fired wild shots down into the canyon. Joshua, summoning his last reserves of strength, raised his pistol with a steady hand despite his wounds. Both men fired simultaneously. Clarkson's bullet went wide, chipping stone beside Joshua's head. But the former sheriff's aim was true, and Clarkson pitched forward, tumbling down the canyon wall to land motionless on the rocky floor below. The remaining gunmen surrendered without further resistance as Turner's soldiers disarmed them systematically. While the major secured the prisoners, Army medic Sergeant Mills began treating Joshua's wounds. Sophie emerged from hiding with the leather satchel containing the investigator's evidence. Turner's expression grew darker with each page he read, understanding the full scope of the criminal enterprise they had uncovered. "Dear God," Turner muttered, studying photographs and documents that detailed corruption reaching into the territorial government itself. "This evidence will destroy a dozen careers and send 50 men to prison." As the army doctor worked to stop Joshua's bleeding, little Grace knelt beside him and took his hand. "Are you going to leave us now, Uncle Josh?" Through his pain and exhaustion, Joshua managed a weak smile. For the first time in 5 years, he had something worth living for. 8 months later, Joshua Blake stood at the gates of his rebuilt homestead, watching 4 girls play in the yard of what had become a true home. The Clarkson House of Mercy had been permanently closed, its corrupt administrators either imprisoned or fled to distant territories where federal warrants could not reach them. The investigator's documents had proven even more devastating than Turner had predicted. The corruption network stretched through 2 territorial governments, resulting in dozens of arrests and the rescue of nearly 200 children from forced labor and worse fates. Sophie's courage in preserving those papers had broken a criminal enterprise that had operated for over a decade. Major Turner had personally ensured that Joshua received official recognition for his heroic actions, along with a federal stipend to help care for the girls. The territorial government, eager to distance itself from the scandal, had granted him legal guardianship without question. Sophie had grown into her role as unofficial leader of their unusual family, helping to transform the homestead into a sanctuary for other displaced children. Hannah had discovered a talent for cooking that filled the house with wonderful aromas, while Rosa tended a garden that would have made Martha proud. Little Grace followed Joshua everywhere, chattering constantly about her plans to become a sheriff when she grew up. The wooden marker that Joshua had carved for his own grave now served a different purpose. It marked the spot where he had buried his old life of despair and found redemption through protecting the innocent. The inscription had been changed to read, "Here lies a man who found everything." As the Arizona sunset painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Joshua reflected on the strange turns that life could take. He had prepared to end his existence in solitude and despair, only to discover that his greatest purpose lay ahead of him rather than behind. "Uncle Josh," Grace called from the porch, where the girls were setting the table for their evening meal. "Supper is ready, and Sophie made your favorite biscuits." Joshua Blake smiled and walked toward the warm light spilling from his home, finally understanding that sometimes salvation comes disguised as the very thing we think will destroy us. The man who had lost everything had indeed found everything: a family worth protecting, a purpose worth living for, and peace with the ghosts of his past.